Before we move on to the commercial gentrification definitions, let's do a quick exercise. And what this exercise is to understand our socioeconomic class background. You go to the Pew Research Center. I'm going to put the link on Canvas. You can't click it from here on YouTube, or you could type Pew Research Center Middle Class Calculator. It will pop up. And let me give you some hypothetical examples here how you do that. You go to California, if you're in California, and I'm going to pick LA, Long Beach, Anaheim. And then I'm going to give you information. For example, let's say you live with your mom and 2 sisters and a brother, so that's 3, 4, 5 of you. Let's put 5. Okay, 5, household income, I'm sorry. Let's say you work, you make 15,000, you help out with some of that, and your mom makes 40. That's 55. Let's just say there's 55,000 in the household income that's used, and there's 5 of you there. Based on this calculation, says you are in the lower income tier, along with 33% of adults in the metro area, which is LA, Long Beach, Anaheim. Metro means a large geographic area. You could go ahead and go below and add some more information if you want to do that. But that is essentially a way to know your economic class background. Let's change this a bit. Out of curiosity, what about if there's a household income of 180,000 with 5 people? Okay, let's see. You are in the middle income tier, along with 49% of adults in an LA, Long Beach, Anaheim. That gives you a big picture view of the difference when we talk about middle class or working class. You could add some other information there to get into more details. And when does it start? What's the lower middle income class, and where does it start? I encourage you to do that if you like numbers and understanding this. But this is really useful for us to understand the difference in class background and when we talk about gentrification. Here's a little bit about my background growing up as a kid and young adult. And I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Santana, not too far from Cal State Fullerton. And it gives you some background in terms of the jobs that my mom had when I was growing up, what my dad did growing up for his job. He was a landscaper, a gardener, and my dad's retired, and he still just does yards in Anaheim Hills and in Orange, and he still does that even though he retired from his job as a landscaper for a company. And that's my upbringing. So that could give you an idea of how much my parents were able to afford in terms of a home, what kind of cars they would drive. And that's my experience. I encourage you to think about your background growing up. If you're on your own now, what that socioeconomic class status was for you growing up, and how does it compares now. Everybody will have different ways to plug into that calculator, but that's my story growing up there. Going back to commercial gentrification, here are the key points to know. It's that there's patterns now of business types now marketing to and selling to higher income communities, which not working class or working poor anymore, but they're selling products and providing services to people of middle class backgrounds, from the whole spectrum of the middle class. And to do that, oftentimes what happens is that now those businesses that used to sell particular products that were relatively affordable for the working class consumer, now that business probably would either change their product that they're selling or their service, or it's just not there anymore and replaced by something completely different. And now what they sell and provide is for middle class consumers. One point here is that how could it happen? It happens in different ways, and one is that The assumption is that the business owner does not own the building where they're at. But that assumption is that then now the property owner raises the rent so much that this business just cannot make the profit that they need. And so they move out, they're displaced. That's one way that happens. And we'll go into different ways how commercial gentrification starts to emerge and why we see some patterns. On the left-hand side is just an illustration of my book, Latino City, on gentrification that I completed about 5 years ago, and it's on downtown Santana. And I look at the historical development of gentrification from focusing on the 60s up into the 2020s, 2015, 2010 for time period. And a lot of the gentrification that's going on is happening in central cities. Central cities, for example, you have a city, think about Santana and Anaheim here in Orange County. The oldest cities in Orange County, the first two in the late 1800s. Across time, from the early 1900s to the 50s, the 40s, and 60s, you start to see the development of new cities all around them, from South Orange County and through other parts of Orange County. So these cities, like Santa Ana, for example, was middle class, was majority white up until about the late 50s and the 60s. A lot of the communities who lived there then now started moving out to the newer developments and now the newer cities that we see around Santa Ana. So Santa Ana, geographically speaking, now is central in Orange County in the middle. But central city also now means that a lot of people who live there, the majority now from the 60s onward, are primarily working class. Now they're living in homes that were built in the 1920s, 1910s, 1930s, 1900s, 1950s. They're older homes. The city is older. And now, so that now becomes the central city. Gentrification, what's happening now is the center of the central cities where the downtowns are traditionally are at. Now the downtowns, the commercial areas are being gentrified. The housing around the downtown area, commercial area, all the housing, that's being gentrified. So in the central city gentrification, you're starting to see a lot of gentrification in central cities and the downtown specifically, and the neighborhoods around, in and around the downtown area. That's where you see the majority of the gentrification happening in a lot of in the United States. How does it happen? Individuals, just like Glass pointed out, but you also have real estate investors who are now buying homes in working class areas, fixing them and then selling them much higher and much higher prices than are traditionally the price ranges in those communities. Especially in the last 5 years, that dynamic has changed because just the real estate market, even in the last 2 years, is much different. But there are a lot of different ways that gentrification starts to happen in these neighborhoods. Local government also contributes to this, and that's one of the main points that I like to drive, is that they create improvement districts where they now tax, businesses agree to be taxed specifically to have like a new pot of money for the downtowns, for example, and then that pot of money is used for policing, to have art activities, to have new events, and that all of that privileges and is geared toward more middle class communities. The cities also purchase properties, hold on to them for a while, and then when they purchase it, let's say they buy it for $2 million, to say a building, then they sell it to an investor who says, I will be able to do ABC with it. I promise to fix it. I promise to get tenants in here who will do art, sell art. And so the city will then sell it for $500,000 to this investor when the city paid $2 million for it. But the city makes that agreement knowing that the investor is going to be part of this bigger picture plan on how to revitalize, they use the word revitalize, that area. There's an agreement. So their city has a hand on this. It just doesn't happen because, the business owner opened up a new gallery because they wanted to do it. There's a bigger picture. There's a coordinated, and sometimes somebody could come and put a business in there and they have no idea how much the property owner paid for this building. They're part of a bigger picture. So there's a combination of ways this starts to happen, but cities are typically always involved. Okay. So here local government is how that happens is, so keep your mind on local government. Politicians connected to local government. Politicians have supporters, so help them pay for their campaigns to be in office. You might find a story if you look in your own city, how there are investors, property owners who have interest to be part of gentrification like this. They'll donate to these politicians, and then when there's votes saying, should we buy that property for $2 million and then sell it for $500,000, we have to put a vote for that. This person the politician might be in favor of something like that because they receive donations directly from someone who's going to benefit or from others who may benefit for similar arrangements. Who wins, who loses? We've already talked about who wins, who loses. It's working class, working poor communities, and the majority of the working class, working poor communities are communities of color. So there's an intersection there, especially here in Southern California. When you think about gentrification, it's class, but it intersects with the working class, with racial ethnic communities. And so here are the different ways to wrap your brain around it. The point is, it's not just individuals. There are arrangements with cities, city politicians, investors, property owners, business owners. They all work hand in hand to make this coordinated effort to gentrify. These are just some examples, again, of the design. Let's say there's a neighborhood where there's 40 homes. A number of those homes the city could purchase, pay off the families, say, hey, I want to buy your home. I'll give you this much. The family says, great, yes, I'll do it. The city boards it up for about 10 years. Nobody lives there. Then they sell all these homes to investors for a lower rate. And then these investors could knock down these homes and then create lofts. Lofts are, I'll show you some pictures shortly, but they look like apartments. And the idea is that at the bottom is a business, and at the top you could live at the top. And you start to see a lot of these type of lofts in gentrified areas. So now these lofts are for smaller families, and they're more expensive than the homes were near them or before them. So now you have smaller families, higher incomes in areas that used to be in structurally designed homes that were bigger, where more families can fit, and the families are working class. So you start to see these trends. And then again, here you have other ways gentrification affects, and you start to think about who wins, who loses. It's from architecture. Now you have more police vigilant around the area, and you look up articles on gentrification and policing and see what you find. There's a lot out there in terms of people being targeted and not being welcome in certain areas. And I encourage you to look for stuff like that. And so those are some examples of things that happen when you have gentrification in commercial areas. Okay. Here are some local debates. For example, in Santa Ana, New Faces and Contentious Revival, New York Times article, How Can Mexicans Fight Gentrification, O.C. Wheatley, and Santa Ana's Gentrification Wars, a podcast. And I encourage you to look up stories from your city and see if there is any gentrification going on. Oftentimes with my students, when we have this discussion and this lecture, they'll go, oh my goodness, I used to see it, but I didn't understand what that was. I used to think it was good, but now I'm not too sure. I used to think it was good, now I don't agree it's good. And there's a mix. There's a mix of views. And some students say, oh my goodness, across the street, they're starting to do this type of development. And we got a flyer that is telling us that this type of development is going to happen across our street from our house. Now we're really concerned. I encourage you to look this up. Here are some guiding questions for you, and you don't have to turn it in, but it will be helpful for you.